Greetings and welcome to my channel. I made a video on a philosophical argument for universal salvation a while ago. To clarify, I am not a philosopher, and so whatever results from my musings stem from my seemings about what is true and what is not. I'll heavily borrow from David Bentley Hart, so here goes. Another philosophical argument for universal salvation. Absolute rejection of God is the ultimate evil end. God is not bound by anything outside of himself to create, and so this means that God is absolutely free when he does create. Whatever God wills ultimately reflect who he fundamentally is due to his freedom. This means that God does not intend anything as an end apart from himself. David Bentley Hart said it best when he stated, "If God creates the world from nothingness, under no compulsion and with no motive but the overflow of his own infinite goodness, it is only in the finished reality of all things that the full nature of God's activity will be revealed. What will be disclosed, moreover, cannot be only the nature of creation, but must necessarily touch upon the divine nature as well. If it is true that creation in no sense adds to, qualifies, or perfects God, if, that is, the God who creates from nothing is always already the infinite God who neither requires nor is susceptible to any process of becoming, nothing proper to creation is beyond his power and intention. Inasmuch as creation is not a process of theogony, by which God forges himself in the fires of the finite, it is a genuine theophany, and its final state, intended as it is in the very act of creating, must reveal something of who God is in himself. While it is true that creation does not modify or qualify God, much less determine what he is in himself, and true also that creation is instead entirely determined by him, for just this reason, creation's total dependency upon God's will, the final reality of creation will reveal God for who he is in himself. Any intentional act that is not conditional upon some prior or more ultimate necessity is a revelation of the moral identity of the intending agent. If I happen to kill someone because, in willing some other goal, I end up doing so contra her, that fact does not disclose much about who I truly am. If I kill someone because I freely choose to do so, as a necessary part of an ultimate design that I was never bound to realize by any condition other than my own desire to bring it to pass, then that fact tells everything about me. In other words, God's permission for some of humanity to be damned to hell, albeit permissively, is ultimately enfolded in God's antecedent will, and thus such an evil end must reflect who God is in himself. God has positively willed a natural evil end. David goes on to say, and a natural evil becomes also a moral evil to the very degree that it is directly intended by a willing agent. And yet, given the metaphysics of creatio ex nihilo, there is no logical room here for making a moral distinction between what God directly intends in creation and what he merely allows to happen. Call this theme 3b, at that final limit, will and permission necessarily become indistinguishable. To sum up this part, God is perfectly free. A natural evil becomes a moral evil when directly intended by a willing agent. God's permission of a human's absolute or eternal rejection of the divine is an end enfolded in God's direct intention. This means that God has willed a moral evil and therefore, God is evil. This logical conclusion would not even change if God made the world on the off chance that some of humanity would damn themselves and yet never really does. Hart says, it is a logical truism that all secondary causes in creation are reducible to their first cause. This is not a formula of determinism. It merely means that nothing can appear within the consequence of God's creative act that is not, at least as a potential result, implicit in their primordial antecedent. So, even if God allows only for the mere possibility of an ultimately unredeemed natural evil in creation, this means that, in the very act of creation, he accepted this reality, or this real possibility, as an acceptable price for the ends he desired. In acting freely, all the possibilities that the agent knowingly accepts are positively willed as acceptable conditions of the end the agent seeks to achieve. If I freely and knowingly choose a course of action that may involve the death of my child, knowing that that death will then be an ineradicable detail of the pattern of what I bring about, morally I have willed his death within the total calculus of my final intentions, as a cost freely accepted, even if in the end his death never actually comes about. One cannot positively will the whole without positively willing all the necessary parts of the whole, whether those parts exist in only potential or in fully actual states. And so, if God does indeed tolerate that final unredeemed natural evil as the price of his creation, he not only thereby reduces the goodness of his creative act to a merely relative goodness, he also converts that natural evil into a moral evil, one wholly enfolded within the total calculus of his own venture in creating, and thereby reveals himself to be not God, the good as such, but only a God who is, at most, relatively good. This also means, incidentally, call this theme 3C, that in such a final state of things the damned would in some very real sense be the saviors of the elect, or at least their redeemers, sacrificial victims whose eternal suffering is the cost accepted by God for the felicity of the blessed. 4. Whether the damned are predetermined to their reprobation or merely carried there by the unpredictable forces of chance, they, far more so than Christ, are the true Lamb slain from the foundation of the world, the ransom eternally ordained by God and the blood eternally spilled so that the kingdom may be established. They are what God is willing, either by decree or permission, to forfeit. After all, if this is how the game must be played in order for anyone to win at it, the losing lot might just as well have fallen to the redeemed. If Hart's argument holds up, then the only viable Christian position to take is a dogmatic universal salvation, because even hopeful universalism depends on believing that God possibly allows for some of us to be damned.